On this episode of the show, I have with me Jason Fellin. He is the head of growth engineering at OnX Maps, and we're going to actually talk about building a growth engineering team, and we're going to talk about some of the nuances to other engineering teams. And obviously, these growth engineering teams have a really diverse skill set, and we're going to talk to him about that. Talk to him about running experiments, when to invest longer in infrastructure, relationships with marketing, maybe a few other things if we can fit it all in. Jason, thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. What do you guys do at OnX Maps?
Yeah, so we're we're primarily like a venture app company. We were founded as more of a hunting company. So our flagship mobile app is OnX Hunt, but we've branched out from there. So over the past several years, launching OnX Off-Road for off-roaders who like to take their vehicles in the backcountry on 4x4 type roads, and then we followed that up with launching OnX Backcountry, which is geared towards hikers, mountain bikers, climbers, that type of non-motorized vehicle adventure person. And recently we're launched OnX Fish, which is first targeting anglers in the Midwest area. So we're sort of this, we have this portfolio of apps. They kind of target different users that are, like to get into the outdoors, adventure, those types of things. So primarily, a lot of our value is in the mapping. Putting public-private land on the map is kind of what we're known for. But then besides that, content within these different outdoor adventure type pursuits that people do. So that's kind of our bread and butter.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I guess this episode we'll be talking about growth engineering, and maybe a good starting point in case somebody hasn't heard about what growth engineering is. So let's start with that. What is growth engineering? Yeah,
growth engineering is a bit of a separate track to a certain extent. A lot of folks, maybe even outside of the bigger tech companies in Silicon Valley or other places, don't really know what it is. But it's the primary sort of motto, I guess, that we think about is growth engineers scope to validate, not build. So we're, when you're acting as a growth engineer in a role on a growth engineering team, your primary focus is moving some kind of metric, and it's usually tied to some kind of business metric or rolls up to a business metric. Either it's user activation, conversion on a paywall, trying to increase some kind of acquisition sort of rate or whatever. So that's your primary thing that you're trying to move. And so as opposed to I'm building a feature and I need to architect it in a way that can be used and scaled, right? So our sort of motto is that, again, we scope to validate, not build. And what that translates to is 30% of our code, or maybe 20 to 30% of our code could live on, because almost everything we ship is in a context of an experiment. So pretty common that experiments do fail. It's very common to have a 20 to 40% fail rate. And so because of that, again, we don't want to over engineer things. We don't want to, write code that's going to live on or needs to be architected in a way that can scale for the future. So that's kind of the cornerstone of growth engineering.
Interesting. I guess for that, it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts within the team. You mentioned there's a lot of diverse skill sets when you're building a growth engineering team. Love to kind of hear what some of those different skill sets look like.
Yeah, it's an interesting, when you're building a team, the hiring process is, trying to tease out what skill sets folks do have that are coming in. And it obviously depends on what level you're looking for. There's a lot of software engineers that haven't had the opportunity to work on a growth team. So they maybe don't know, what those skills are. And, so typically, the strategy that we've used over the years is looking at different aspects of backgrounds outside of software engineering, and things like finance, psychology, these types of things, people that have maybe tried to do a startup or working in various small kind of companies. So the skills that you end up learning as you join a growth engineering team are things like just sort of like a basic understanding of statistics and statistical analysis, looking at data and different sort of analytics that can inform your ideas and your hypotheses as you start to think about what types of experiments might succeed, or things that we should focus on to again move those metrics that a pod has to do in a context of maybe a quarter or whatnot. So that's one of the things. Another thing is we talk about like growth tactics. So these are things like behavioral economics concepts and things like that were like loss aversion. If you've ever heard of that, we care more about missing out on something than a gain. So those types of like psychological components that folks have developed over time. So all of these types of things kind of lead into what makes a good growth engineer. And so, when like looking for folks, out in the market, it's definitely, it becomes a challenge to kind of tease out the folks that actually want to do growth engineering, because over the course of 5 years since I've been at OnX, for example, like most of the people that are applying, they're like, oh, this is a mapping company. I'm really curious about working on a mapping company, right? So they will apply for this role, and potentially we hire them, but it turns out they're not so interested in growth. They actually want to move on to another team and do product development as opposed to the growth engineering work that we do. So it's a bit of a nuance, and over the course of like I said, the 5 years, we've sort of crafted like how we sort of do the interview process and those sort of like skills that are ancillary to typical software engineers. So
interesting. Yeah. I guess when you mentioned, not everything you build will stick around. In fact, most of it doesn't. When you're hiring people that haven't done growth engineering, is that a big shift for somebody to get into space where they are building things that aren't designed to have that longevity? And I guess I'll leave that question first.
It's not a huge shift if you've worked in sort of like an agile process, right? Like where you're sort of building, especially like a new feature or something like that, or like, maybe you have worked on a team that has thought about how to like build and test from a product standpoint. Again, like on a growth team, we're not building the product. We're not building a feature. We're essentially trying to get people to use a feature or engage, or those types of things, like different texts, different value props, like those, conversion or is a typical sort of metric that we look at. So yeah, it's, if you have that mentality of like, I'm going to write code, I'm going to build something, and then it might not live on, then that's certainly helpful. I think it's those other skills that we've developed, like a growth onboarding sort of process for like how to train somebody to be a growth engineer, particularly if they haven't had those types of experiences and things like that. So, the mentality is certainly, I think it's also like the collective culture that we've built is like when somebody does come in, they can see that the folks aren't taking very long to build something or to get a change out. And oftentimes, to be honest, like a lot of the A/B tests that we are building and we're doing, that it's not very complex. It's maybe changing a layout or just like how a flow kind of flows. It's not like a big architectural sort of problem that needs to happen. So that's, and I will mention, we can probably get into this down the line here, but there's a different aspect of growth engineering. So it's not all of these like short-term sort of small A/B tests and not large efforts. We do think about mid to long range efforts to sort of build a platform that can then be extended and used for like longer term growth, or how do we build a system that can scale, especially because our company, we have all these different apps, right? Like we want to have each app leverage a sort of system that can be used for running experiments in a cheaper and faster way. So that's a component of it as well.
Absolutely. I guess when you're looking, and definitely understand, the role and dynamics, when you're looking at understanding your impact to the business, it sounds like obviously there are a lot of different initiatives, and you could probably start tracking and testing those. Is that something that comes a little bit easier to growth engineering in terms of seeing like your impact to the business, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's primarily what led me to be interested in this is like I'm a person that likes to know that my work ladders directly into the success of the company. It's a bit harder to do that once you're like sort of down in that other level of like building things. Like it's hard to know like did the work of my week or my month or whatever like ladder into anything that added value to the company. But for us, like we can actually see like we have pretty good data, to be able to tie the work that we do to those like top line company like KPIs and things like that, and OKRs, right? So we can see like if we have an annual revenue target, like what percentage of work did our team contribute to that? So I think that we talk about that a lot in our team, like how important that is and how important it is for being able to work directly towards that as opposed to like that sort of fuzzy understanding of whether or not the work that I did as an individual laddered into the overall company success. So,
absolutely. And I guess when it comes to growth engineering, and you've done a great job of kind of talking and walking us through some of the differences and some of the skills needed, the relationship with marketing might be something I want to touch on, because it sounds like there's a lot of probably coordination. Talk about that relationship with marketing.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, it's there's different sort of like thoughts around the industry of like, is a growth org just include marketing in that cross-functional nature? I mean, we've talked exclusively about growth engineering, but like our teams are cross-functional, right? So we have a product manager in every team. We have a designer in every team, a growth-minded designer. We have a QA person. Like everybody on that team, like their goal is to move the metric or metrics that team is kind of signed up for a given quarter or a time period. So in some companies, like marketing is depending upon the context or whatever area of focus that team has. Marketing is just kind of added into that cross-functional structure. We are, over the course of time since I've been at OnX, we've been trying to sort of like create that growth org kind of strategy, and it's kind of a work in progress right now. But a lot of the effort that we do to support marketing ends up being into standing up like their MarTech stack. If listeners aren't familiar with that, that's typically some kind of like third-party system that helps with user acquisition campaigns, tying data that needs to flow to ad acquisition platforms like Meta, Facebook, Google, those types of things to tune their algorithms for spending ads. And then there's the CRM type MarTech platform, like something like Braze is one of the market leaders there, that run rate for email, and then in-app sort of messaging as well, that allows marketers to run experiments, try different tactics to communicate with users across their sort of life cycle once we've gotten them into our ecosystem with like creating an account, for example. So a lot of times we do have goals that cross over, but if you think about like a user acquisition team, and just a reminder, we're in the primarily like the mobile app space. Our apps are monetized through subscriptions, so we're kind of a subscription model, right? So a user acquisition group, they're thinking about cost per acquisition is their target, and so our team can help support them with reducing the convert or increasing conversion, which decreases cost per acquisition. But they're responsible for bringing quality users into that funnel. But we are responsible for sending the data back to that system. So again, that's kind of in this growth platform area where we then have to provide the technical support for them to be able to do their job. So we end up being this kind of like technical role that enables marketing. But then we also have these like growth teams that are doing those sort of like side-by-side experimentation to either decrease cost per acquisition or increase long-term value, LTV. Those are the two types of like higher level kind of KPIs that we look at. So, so it's sort of like multiple teams across like a growth org, even if it's not, I guess, officially designed that way in terms of org structure. But it it does you do end up having these groups working towards the same objectives from different angles. So, yeah.
I love the overview. I think that helps frame a very good full picture of kind of that relationship as well. And you mentioned obviously, you guys do a lot of experimentation. You guys, are constantly trying to improve on things. And I understand with the relationship with marketing and some of the MarTech, it makes sense. As a team, I guess when your execution, your methodology, do you guys follow similar, Scrum type methodologies? Obviously, if you're doing a lot of experiments, I don't know if they're shorter or longer, or do they fit into those, or do you need to do something different? How is the actual team run from the execution standpoint?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we transitioned to Kanban a while back,
Nice.
and that just gives us a lot more flexibility. Like that, we found the Scrum process didn't really fit well with growth because we need to move fast, and again, it's all about we have typically our pods that are focused on moving metrics. They have a quarter to move a metric by a certain amount, and we can't like mess around with sprints and be like, it's like if we have a winner and it gives us some kind of precedent, we need to follow that up with something else. Maybe we have a winner in one app and we want to transition it to another app, or we have a concept that worked that we need to expound upon, and that needs to happen right away. But in terms of how the process works, at a company level, we have two typical platforms, right? iOS, Android. There is a web app, which is slightly separate, but so those, we have bi-weekly releases alternating between platform, and so typically what it looks like is, we try to get at least one experiment out per platform per release, and so the duration of an experiment typically is 2 weeks, but it just sort of depends on. There's a lot of like factors in experimentation, which probably don't have time to go into here, but the limiting factor overall is just the amount of traffic that is in the surface area that the experiment targets, and so that determines the length of an experiment. So if you think about that and add it up, right, it's 6 mobile releases per quarter, so that leads to 6 experiments per platform, and then you sort of multiply that across all the different apps that we have. It becomes kind of a matrix of things. And we have found that, particularly across Android and iOS, it's a very kind of segmented user base and different mindset. So we have seen like winners in one and losers in another. And so that does sometimes translate into like slightly different experiences across those platforms. But in terms of like that sort of day-to-day execution side, it's definitely like, we're constantly thinking about like what can move a metric, what are some of the ideas in the backlog. We do have an experiment idea review process that allows anyone on each team to submit an idea, and then we talk about those and think about what based on precedents, based on historical context, whatever, what could succeed and what should we invest in, and those types of things. And I mean, I could talk a lot about that, but we have a framework for like prioritization and like how do we think about what experiment we should fund, and la la la. So there's a lot that goes into that, and it's very much a nuance. Like there's no, we can't just say, oh, there's a metric here and it'll just plug it in and it'll succeed, right? So that's again this nuance of growth engineering where from the engineering mindset, it's like, oh, I'm going to build this thing and it's going to be beautiful and it's going to be engineered perfectly and whatever. We don't think that way. It's like again, anything that we build can just be tossed in the wayside of the digital dustbin, I guess. Yeah.
I like that. I'm gonna have to remember the digital dustbin within development. I guess when you are looking at the growth engineering role and you are from the outside, hey, you know what? This actually sounds like something that fits the type of person I am, the type of engineer I like to be. Is there anything different? I mean, you kind of mentioned, you guys have a process to kind of weed people out, but, if you are maybe thinking I'd like to shift into growth engineering, is there anything you could do to prepare? Is there any advice to maybe landing that first role within the space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the biggest thing is just kind of like that scientific curiosity mindset. Like, I wonder what would happen if, like, I wonder if we put folks through this experience, what would their behavior look like, and then again, using all of the precedents and mindset and we can look at, there's, a subscription app isn't a new thing. Like, there's so many of them, right? So we can look at like successful companies, what are the tricks that they've used? I know we haven't mentioned AI, but like, that's definitely something that we look at as well to generate ideas and things for how to think about like what experiments could be quality and, those types of things. So I would say, that curious mindset, business related mindset, like wanting your work to ladder into like the success of a business, definitely a base understanding of statistics. You don't need to know you don't need to take a statistics course. You don't need to, go really deep there, but you just need to understand how the data that, is flowing in the context of an experiment ladders into that statistical analysis that happens. In today's world, all of that is certainly sent over to a third party. We use one, it's very common now, but you still need to understand like what's happening under the hood on a high level. So that's definitely something to learn. And again, I think just generally this concept of like knowing, how to scope for speed and validation over, architecture and, long living code. There's certainly, again, it's a nuance there. We don't, right, in the context of an experiment, right? So we say we're not going to write unit tests. This is just a small example. We're not going to write unit tests when we're launching an experiment. But if that treatment wins, we need to pull out the feature flag and then put unit tests in, because that's now in the code, right? So it's not, I don't want to say that all of the work that growth engineers do ends up being just like bad code or non-scalable code. Like, we definitely go back and refine and clean up the things that do live on. It's just the things that are in that sort of, I wonder what will happen. That's the area that we don't do the refinement. So,
fantastic, yeah. Jason. I love the discussion about the role and its position within the company. I'm sure we didn't exhaust the topic. People probably have more questions, maybe even than we tried to answer. But if somebody does have a question about the growth engineering space, what is a good way of connecting with you?
I'd say, I'll probably attach my LinkedIn profile here. Feel free to, give me a shout out there, messaging, whatnot. I'd be happy to, link my email as well. So it'd probably be the best. I'm not a huge social media person beyond that. So.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Jason, I appreciate the time. I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think Jason did an amazing job walking us through the growth engineering, role, from building a team, the diverse skill sets required in there, its relationship to marketing and where it kind of fits within the scope of things. Also, how projects are run. And he mentioned they run things a little bit differently. They don't use Scrum, they use Kanban. And if you do have a question, please follow up with him. And also, please share this episode with somebody else who might benefit from it, who might be interested in getting into growth engineering. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.